It's time now for World Watchers International with Mae Brussell, who for over 17 years has investigated and exposed political conspiracies worldwide. World Watchers International originates at KLRB, Carmel, California. Here's Mae.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. This is program number 506, and it's August the 16th, 1981. I cut out my newspapers and articles regularly and have about 140 of the top stories of the week, each week, and never have enough time to share them. And I'm going to run through maybe a story every 2 minutes or so of some items that are going on in the news so we don't overlook them, and update you for the next 2 weeks on some of the articles that I think are the most interesting in the news. I did get a letter this week from a listener in Santa Cruz, and he wrote, "Dear Mae, as a new listener to World Watchers International, I find it hard to believe there are as many tangled webs of conspiracy as you claim. Please send me what information you have or can send on the news sources so that I can read and judge for myself." One of the reasons I have the tape cassettes that go out every week and the printed sheets that accompany the cassettes is for people to study exactly what I am saying. I don't have any secret sources of information, and if you send a self-addressed stamped envelope, say once a month, and 25 cents for each week program, as many listeners do, send $1 when there's 4 weeks in the month, and a self-addressed stamped envelope, I'll enclose the source of information for the past 4 weeks. That's easier than doing every week. Most people don't keep it up every week, or you can do it every 2 months and then send 2 stamps because, of course, the package is heavier and requires more postage. If you want the sources of information for the program, write to me, Box 22511, Carmel 93922, and for every week that you want the sources of the information, enclose 25 cents. And if you want some of the cassettes, I'll send you a list and you can order the back programs if it interests you. In the same mail as the party who can't believe the interlocking conspiracies, I got a letter from Henderson, this is North Carolina. "Dear Mae, your interview for Ares Research, the one I did on John Lennon that I told about on this program, was great. The most in-depth exploration of the Lennon assassination which I've seen. Your information confirms research we have conducted which suggests that both Mark David Chapman and John Hinckley Jr. were programmed assassins to kill John Lennon and attempt to kill President Reagan. Spiral, which is their organization newsletter called the Society for the Protection of Individual Rights and Liberties, is developing a national and international network of independent researchers and investigators. We are laying the foundation for widespread local newspaper and radio news releases called APR, Awareness Press Release. I'm putting your name on our complimentary mailing list, and if you wish to share information with us, this would be appreciated." And in the editions that they've gotten out on Spiral, they sent those to me, the Society for the Protection of Individual Rights and Liberties. They have information on electronic banking, on the computerized world of handling your money, on the conspiracy to shoot President Reagan, and a section about the possible relationship of the shooting of Ronald Reagan to the murders of the Atlanta school children. I've had that on the program before. Spiral is a group, as I say, inter-organization communication group, ever vigilant, and they have a newsletter, and they sent me a lot of literature. I'll pass on some of it to you on later programs so you can see the work that's coming out of North Carolina, and I got a letter from them there and appreciate that information. So while it's very confusing to new listeners to get the lingo or the pace, this goes pretty fast, you can always go back and get tape cassettes and share them with your friends and get the sources of information and begin to look them up yourself. There was a big story this week, of course, all over national television and the news media. Associated Press, "Don't let Sirhan out," the district attorney in Los Angeles advised. They put a person in a prison cell with him, a man named Eugene Wilson, and Sirhan, the man who has been charged with shooting and killing Robert Kennedy, soon to be paroled or would be paroled in 1984, They're pleading that the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office and so forth, we can't let him out. Write to Governor Brown. If he were out, he would attempt to shoot Ted Kennedy, and he had his attorney, Grant Cooper, on the list as an enemy, and Robert Kaiser, the author who wrote RFK Must Die. Well, that's a good hit list. Sirhan is a person who I believe was mentally programmed. He was a mind control zombie. He was in the Ambassador Hotel. There isn't any ballistic proof that any of his bullets were the ones that got into the body of Robert Kennedy. Those came from behind. And if you're going to write letters, the district attorney in Los Angeles wants you to write the governor and get hysterical and say, don't let Sirhan out. I'd appreciate if you'd write to the governor and ask him about the role of Thane Cesar, T-H-A-N-E-C-E-S-A-R, a security guard from Lockheed who allegedly did the fatal headshot to Robert Kennedy and the 2 shots in the back. He was a security guard who pulled a gun from behind. He fell down and shot upward, and that's the location of the fatal bullets. They might investigate, the governor might investigate the Nazi Party in Riverside, California, where our Attorney General Demekian is saying that this is a source of terrorism. They're admitting that terrorism on the right is a threat. They can't finger any left terrorism that's a threat. But now, lately, they're talking about the Klan and the Nazis and the Croatians and so forth, Alpha 66, the anti-Castro Cubans. They may do an in-depth study into the Nazi Party in Riverside and find if, in fact, this alleged assassin of Robert Kennedy is the organizer of the Nazi Party out in Riverside, or if he lives there and what he's doing. The attorney that is mentioned in this story by this man, Mr. Wilson, who was with Sirhan, who I believe would be a provocateur sent from the Los Angeles Police Department and put out in the yard or in the cell with Sirhan. The attorney that he mentioned, Grant Cooper, was put on the case to represent Sirhan. He told the jury, I didn't come here to tell you my client wasn't guilty. He was. And the trial for Sirhan was delayed because he had a client, John Rosselli, of organized crime, who he was representing first in an indictment in a Friars Club affair in Beverly Hills. John Rosselli has been named as a possible co-conspirator and assassin of John Kennedy with Carlos Marcello and Santos Trafficante and at the time of that Senate Select Committee, the House hearings rather, on John Kennedy's assassination. Rosselli was cut up and put in a drum outside of Florida and sunk, and then his body surfaced again. He was murdered. Well, Grant Cooper represented John Rosselli, an organized crime figure that had been mentioned in the murder of John Kennedy, and that was the attorney, Grant Cooper, went right from Rosselli to Sirhan and took that case and told the jury his client was guilty. I don't believe that Sirhan would talk about killing Ted Kennedy. He was offered asylum in Libya with Gaddafi. He has been a straight-A student. I have no love for a person who kills Robert Kennedy, a senator, or for anybody else. But I don't believe he killed anybody. I think he got a lot of bullets off in the Ambassador Hotel, and there's other people that know the same story, and I've done other programs on it. And I think there's a lot of investigation to be done into why they're afraid to let Sirhan out at any time, because he's so closely linked to the California politicians, to Chief of Police Ed Davis, who was the Los Angeles police chief at the time, and he's now senator in California, to Evil Younger, his real name is Ebel, of course, with his military, FBI, Defense Department links. He was the district attorney who prosecuted the case, who wants to be on the Supreme Court or the director of the FBI someday. The California elite, Ronald Reagan as governor of California, Mayor Sam Yorty, who was always in the wings waiting for another job. The whole clique of California politicians that covered this up and were part of the murder of Robert Kennedy in California are moving up in the scale because they're part of the Reagan entourage. I warned many listeners for years and years about the Reagan Group and the Hoover Institute and the advisors that would be getting into power if Ronald Reagan was president. We had 8 years of that man as governor of California. And the entourage of the police and law enforcement around Ronald Reagan is as mean and tough as the way he handled the air control group. The strikers said or voiced the opinion that they realized he was so tough, they might have taken a different stance and moved differently. Well, there was no reason for them not to know he was. He was out here when the COINTEL program was going, when he worked with the FBI and CIA to steal from Cesar Chavez's office and Saul Alinsky's home, to break in there and take things out of his bag and to smear his reputation, the labor organizer and leader. Ronald Reagan was behind the Mind Control Center and experimentations in the California hospitals and the creation of these zombies and prison riots. The average person in America doesn't know mean until they've had Reagan for a while. This is only 6 or 7 months. And he never was nice, and because he was sold by the advertising agents, such as J. Walter Thompson and other PR jobs, and he always has this great big smile and his jelly beans. The real police state has yet to swing into action, and they're saving their tough buns for future action. And I just got out an article this week about portable jails that have been built that they're installing because they can put them up very quickly. The jails are overcrowded, so they've built portable jails, and they have portable morgues trucks. The morgues in Miami are too crowded. There's too much violence and too many refugees, so they're using ice trucks for portable morgues and portable jails. So don't think they'll run out of space to put people. And it's very, very important for the future of law enforcement in this country to zoom in to the Sirhan case. That's why the House Select Committee on Assassinations only went into the story of John Kennedy's assassination and stopped at the level of organized crime and said there was a conspiracy instead of going into the real Pentagon, the CIA, the Navy intelligence, the Nazi connections to the killing of John Kennedy. And they went into Martin Luther King's assassination and said there was a conspiracy, cutting it off at possible organized crime and not asking who, closing with a conspiracy finale but never saying who or how. But the reason they wouldn't touch the Robert Kennedy assassination was that the California people are in the White House, and that's the difference. And they will be your people. They will be your police, law enforcement, your senators, not only in California, but the disease, it's worse than the medfly. The politics of California and the California mentality that came out of here is a social disease, and it has traveled. And if the Sirhan case were to be nipped in the bud, it would affect all of you differently if it were opened up. And that's why it hasn't been opened up, because Ronald Reagan and Yorty and Ed Davis and these other people have to keep working higher and higher, just like Goering and Goebbels and Himmler. Where were they when Hitler in 1933 was working into office? If anybody had stopped those men for all the illegal things they did as they got into power, Hitler couldn't have been such a terror. Finally, when he invaded Poland in 1939 and had sabotaged all the countries around him with the Fifth Column and taken over Europe with the torture and the refugees and the murders and the bombings, if people had watched those underlings, so-called underlings, for years, because they worked up through murders, crimes, blackmail, and so forth, firing decent people, kicking them out of universities, locking up people who hadn't committed crimes, letting out people who had committed crimes. This team that was involved around the Robert Kennedy assassination has to keep Sirhan in, because if he gets out to Libya alive, then Gaddafi not only blackmails us 100 times over with what he knows from Edwin Wilson and Frank Turple and George Corcola and Carlos the Jackal, all CIA people around him. If Sirhan gets there, then they control the United States through blackmail, because information is power, and there's no way they can let Sirhan out of this country alive. And as far as the Robert Kaiser, he's supposed to have said he wanted to kill. Kaiser wrote a book, RFK Must Die, and it's like the famous Lee Harvey Oswald diary, or the incriminating letters that are always left behind by these lone assassins. The whole book you could throw out, because you start from the very beginning. How many bullets were in the Ambassador Hotel? Where did the bullets go? Which were the fatal bullets? Who else was shot? Why did they cut off the sleeve of Robert Kennedy? Who took the ceiling panel? Who threw away Sirhan's gun? Who mismanaged the physical evidence of the murder of Senator Robert Kennedy? If you solve that, you'd save yourself future problems across the country. But most people aren't smart enough to do that. They don't care enough. So unfortunately, they're going to have to pay the penalty of living with these criminals moving up. If you want past cassettes on Robert Kennedy assassination, and Sirhan. I did one this June the 6th, 1977. That was 4 years ago, but that cassette is still available. Tape 272 on hypnosis, mind control, the erasing of the mind by the CIA, Sirhan, the victim of the CIA plots. And June the 13th, 1977, tape 273, I had Dr. Edward Simpson Callis on the program with me. And if you want that cassette, you'll hear him. He was the head psychologist at San Quentin when Sirhan was sent there. He expected a mental vegetable and found somebody very bright and responsive and knew he was under mind control. And when Sirhan trusted this psychologist, he was told not to see Sirhan anymore, and he left San Quentin, being the psychologist there. And he lives here on the Monterey Peninsula, and probably was the first psychologist to handle a case like this, who, even though he had contacts and still has with the government inside and out, was honest enough to break this case and ask for the trial transcript and realize that Sirhan had been programmed to be told by Dr. Bernard Diamond how he had killed Robert Kennedy when he hadn't done it. Tape 277, July the 7th, 1977, I did a program on Lillian Castellano and the Robert Kennedy assassination, and then another part 2 a week later, July 1977, just 4 years ago, Dr. Joling and the cover-up in Los Angeles of the Robert Kennedy assassination. And then I did a last one on with Lillian Castellano, passed away February 19th, 1978. And I did a program on the researchers, John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy assassination, the researchers, and on Ed Davis, chief of police in Los Angeles, who's now a California senator, and Evel Younger, and so forth. So there are past cassettes, if you really want to study this story, that you can get. Another story in the news this week, man in coffin is not Oswald. Marina Oswald is very frustrated that she is not allowed to have the coffin exhumed. She's seen pictures that have now put over the wire service of a man in a coffin that is not Lee Harvey Oswald. It's a sickening picture of somebody who almost has David Ferrie's eyebrows, if you know what those look like. And a policeman, a freelance writer, Jim Mars, got a hold of some pictures that were taken, unauthorized snapshot by a retired police official who has shown them to Marina Oswald, and she says that she knows that is not her husband. I've talked with Marina, and I think I've mentioned on the program before, she wanted me to help you listeners raise $13,000 to exhume the body. I don't know the people who have that kind of money, but even if we all went in debt to do it and had the money and said, now it can be done, the government would stop and say, no, that's our property. So they may as well pay for it because they would grab the right to examine it and national security to hush it up. There's no way to believe that with people like Gerald Ford making millions of dollars as a lawyer on multinational corporations and on the Warren Commission, who lied about Lee Harvey Oswald and who knew the body was cremated and the identity didn't match, the Secret Service had discrepancy in height as against the FBI report. There's a difference in weight. Even in the Dallas jail, there were two different men that I've charted out, two different measurements, descriptions, and one was buried and one got away. And before the Warren Commission had one witness called, Marina Oswald as their first witness, they had ordered the cremation of the body, and she was scared. She thought she would be deported. She didn't speak much English. We're talking about 18 years ago, 1963. So she signed a piece of paper and knew that whoever was in there was cremated. Now, she knows that in June of 1963 that Lee got a separate passport, that she had one passport and that he had another. She knew that they were going to go separate ways. He left her a letter after John Kennedy was killed on where the keys were to the safe deposit or the belongings at the bank. They had personal belongings. She left information for him that was brought to her by the Secret Service of get rid of my personal possessions and my clothes, but keep some important papers and save them for me. So she knew that he had some plans because there were detailed instructions of what to do that were delivered to her, and they did have separate passports, and she signed a paper for whoever was in that coffin to be cremated. Now, I think it's important to bring that body out, and if that body isn't there and isn't Lee Harvey Oswald, I know, and I believe I know where he went. I've done 17 years of research on it, and I have the outline ready to roll for a book on the subject, and I think it's very important to get to that and find out if the grave is empty. And we know who ordered it, Chief Justice Earl Warren, and as I say, Gerald Ford is alive, Nicholas Katzenbach, the Deputy Attorney General at the time, is alive. He's a member of a huge corporation, represents them and many firms. They're very prominent people making decisions for us today who are part of this subterfuge, and they should be put on the line and account to us for the kind of shenanigans they're pulling. This party that wrote from Santa Cruz that said he can't believe all these things are going on. Isn't it a little difficult for a widow, a famous widow for Marina Oswald, to ask that a grave be opened up because she knows that the man that is supposed to be her husband is not in that grave? That alone is enough to whet people's imaginations on, as I say, the shenanigans that go on. I mentioned last week Carlos Marcello was indicted in the trial down in New Orleans on various charges. Most of them were dropped. And that his friend Irv Davidson, who was also indicted with him, got off on the charges. They were released. And I said that Irv Davidson was too important a person to ever be indicted. He was indicted but not convicted. They were both arrested. But Irv Davidson could never get a conviction. And I looked up the sheet in 1980, April the 11th, 1980, that's a year and a half, almost a year and a half ago, tape number 436. I refer to these so that those of you that have the past tapes can look it up, and those of you who don't have might want to order them. I talked about the Abscam and the Bry Lab arrests at the time, and behind the schemes I mentioned on that tape, lobbyist Irv Davidson bumps into Bry Lab. He was picked up in Bry Lab. And Irv Davidson said at that time, this was in the Washington Post, April 2nd, 1980, he said, if I get knocked out of the box, in this case he told the FBI when he was arrested on these various charges with Carlos Marcello, it's going to hurt this country. Sometimes, this was Irv Davidson, sometimes the interest of the United States requires certain things which, because of their shaky nature, cannot be identified with the United States. I told the FBI, when they started to arrest him, not to play super agent with me. I have 2 passports. I'm dealing with National Security Council day and night. Now, Irv Davidson had an office in Washington, D.C., and he rented his space to Drew Pearson and Jack Anderson. Jack Anderson has been writing a new series of articles that are absolutely outrageous and ridiculous, and I want to go into some of those with you because he is truly a double agent. He acts like he's coming out with some wonderful material, and then whammo, he's a series of disinformation, contorted information, and I really would like to take on why he limits what he says to certain parts of the political exposures and then covers up the rest so smoothly, and he's consistent in the people that he protects. The Irv Davidson office space that he rented to Jack Anderson and Drew Pearson. He's still close to Jack Anderson, who always put down these conspiracies. And Irv Davidson worked with Carlos Marcello, who G. Robert Blakey said or hinted was part of the conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. He loaned Clint Murchison, the oil man, $4 million and introduced Murchison to Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa has been linked to the murder of John Kennedy and Clint Murchison also. Penn Jones describes in his book, Forgive My Grief, the meeting at Clint Murchison's home the night that before John Kennedy was killed with J. Edgar Hoover and Richard Nixon and the final go-ahead to kill John Kennedy. That was in the home of Clint Murchison, described in Penn Jones' Forgive My Grief, Volume 3 in 1969. And in the Hoffa Wars, it tells the relationship of Jimmy Hoffa and the CIA. And there are many documents and books describing Irv Davidson is, in quotes, an expediter from the War Production Board with a web of contacts. Now, he came right out and said, I'm dealing with the National Security Council night and day, and if I get knocked out, it'll hurt the country, and then you better not step on me because there's things that cannot be identified with the United States. And, of course, one of those is the fact that the United States kills its own presidents. So I knew he wouldn't get convicted in this case. He was indicted but not convicted. There's another article about Carlos Marcello in the Dallas Morning newspaper, the Dallas Morning News, July 22nd. Marcello, this is the organized crime figure, a friend of Davidson's and Hoffa's, and a whole group that were linked to the murder of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. Marcello sought oil for his friend. This comes out of New Orleans, that Carlos Marcello, the mob boss, tried to find Saudi Arabian crude oil last year for his good friend and multimillionaire broker Robert Sutton of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, isn't it ridiculous? A meeting set up January 26, 1980, with Carlos Marcello working with large and wealthy oil men. How is he going to go out and find crude oil for the top millionaire oil people in the country? He was involved, this particular person that he was meeting was allegedly involved in a multi-company daisy chain with oil scandals and so forth. And this particular Anderson that was working with Robert Sutton of Tulsa, Oklahoma, this Robert Anderson, who was to make the introductions, was a former U.S. Treasury Secretary and New York investment banker in an attempt to find oil for Robert Sutton to buy. Now, the possible link of Robert Anderson, U.S. Treasury Secretary, New York investment banker, to Robert B. Sutton of Tulsa, Oklahoma, oil millionaire and Arabian oil, and Carlos Marcello is just one more example of the multinational corporations webbed into organized crime. You know that they didn't get together, Marcello and that gang, to find oil. It had something more to do with jobs they performed in the past, and I don't think Marcello is out digging up crude oil for these multimillionaires. They have contacts, they have meetings, they're important government officials, but they shouldn't have any links with the organized crime figures at all. But as the paper said last week, unhappy millionaire. Marcello is a millionaire himself, and this web of the mob and the oil companies and the multimillionaires in the Defense Department and in the various government programs is so interwoven, like Irving Davidson with Jimmy Hoffa and Carlos Marcello, and the oil people and former public servants, that it's just thoroughly disgusting. And the web of conspiracy does indeed exist. And if you haven't heard this program too often, you'll get the idea after a few weeks or months that there are many conspiracies going on. But unfortunately, they do, or fortunately, do weave and tangle with each other. Don't forget, a conspiracy is two or more people doing an illegal act, and every week I talk about 200 who are acting illegally and weaving with each other. Jack Anderson had an article last week, Carter's Kidnap Plot, and it goes into how Jimmy Carter planned to kidnap Robert Vesco and bring him to this country, and the FBI Director Webster, and they were going to this great kidnapping program from the Bahamas to Florida, but Jack Anderson went down to Bahamas at Nassau and talked with Vesco, and Jimmy Carter got wind that Jack Anderson knew he was going to kidnap him, and he says Jimmy Carter interrupted the Camp David conferences, and even though he's not a subscriber to my column, a mysterious note was delivered that Jack Anderson knows you're going to kidnap Robert Vesco. I don't believe half of this BS. I think it is so ridiculous. We have a director of the CIA who is paid by Robert Vesco. Robert Vesco works with people involved with Murder Incorporated, like Frank Turple and Edwin Wilson and George Corcola. He's an international wheeler and dealer who takes hundreds of millions of dollars, skips out, has worked with the CIA, with Edward Bennett Williams, the attorney whose office is representing John Hinckley Jr., the man who shot Ronald Reagan and 3 others and almost killed them. Vesco is an international wheeler and dealer that had more links to Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon and Bibi Barbosa and the whole Republican Party than ever with Jimmy Carter and the Democrats. And this Jack Anderson just goes on and on every week. He'll do the same column over and over. He doesn't do columns on Project Paperclip or Nazis in this country as often as he gets on Jimmy Carter and Vesco. He's like a broken record. I'm going to take a 1-minute break, and we'll get back on some other important stories of the week.
This concludes the first half of World Watchers International with Mae Brussell. We will return with the second half after a brief pause. Enjoy.
Listening to World Watchers International over FM 102, KLRB, Carmel by the Sea. And now here's Mae Brussell with part 2.
Okay, I'm going to run down for you really quickly some of the big stories of the past week that have taken place that I think are important to watch, and then we'll pick up again, hopefully, pieces later. The Wells Fargo case is going to go to trial. Mr. L. Ben Lewis of Los Angeles, of Beverly Hills, is going to testify against Harold Smith. Harold Smith was a small potato. Huge amounts of money were sent through his bank accounts. He blew the whistle on many of the stories. It took several murders, at least that we know of, and a fire to burn the records for this to go ahead. But Mr. Lewis has been hiding, and if the plot were to fall, they'll use a guy who had used other names or aliases before on minor charges, or they have a leash. This is what you call doing a job with a leash on somebody. You take somebody who has a past criminal offense and you promise them they'll get off that charge if they do a job or if they can use your account to siphon money through for other operations. And if you blow the whistle, they destroy their records of their past actions or kill witnesses if necessary, and then they pull out your earlier charges, and if you're not bumped off, you're put back into prison. So Harold Smith took a certain amount of money and lived as a fat cat with boat and home, and he lived off the hog for a little while, thinking he was pretty cutesy with the Wells Fargo Bank. And then when it came down to where the money was siphoning or coming from or going out from, they pinned it to his account, and now he's the fall guy. And Ben Lewis, who's been hiding ever since this story broke, is going to testify and work with the FBI. The Navy is buying huge cargo ships. They've bought 8 cargo ships to carry military supplies, the world's fastest merchant ship. There's every indication that they're getting ready for war. The president, the would-be president, is running for office in Costa Rica, if they can still have elections, criticized the plans of Ronald Reagan in Central America this week. He said that he gives military assistance in Central America, and he's literally forcing people to become communists, that military assistance is not the only alternative, and we know this. And he said stability is the only thing that should be supported, true social and economic reform, and they shouldn't keep putting money into dictatorships the way we are doing. Jack Anderson wrote another article, a disgusting article this week. 2 rivals are gone. Now, this is the kind of boomerang double whammy that this man pulls. He refers to the 2 airplane crashes in Panama, one of Trujillo's of Panama and one of the president of Ecuador, and suggests that Fidel Castro was behind these mysterious crashes. He said within less than 3 months, mysterious plane crashes have eliminated 2 of Castro's potentially most dangerous rivals. Now, every country in Latin and Central America is a military dictatorship, except possibly these 2, so Castro isn't rivaling with them. He would like to have allies. Here was the elected president of Ecuador, and the president of Panama had recently helped the Sandinistas to get rid of Somoza. Why would Castro oppose a man who gets rid of Somoza, who's constantly a thorn in the side of Fidel Castro in Cuba? Jack Anderson refers to these as mysterious plane crashes. He doesn't write about the mysterious shooting of the Pope. He doesn't write about the mysterious links of John Hinckley Jr. or his family to World Vision and the CIA and AID in Nigeria and Guatemala, or George Bush or John Connally. He doesn't talk about the mysterious shooting of Ronald Reagan and how this John Hinckley Jr. was there at that time and place, and all the mysteries of the surgery and the bullets and discrepancies. He takes 2 people that were blown up, and as I mentioned before, the Trujillo's plane has more to do with drug dealing and wheeling and dealing and the drug arrest, the $2 million in Panamanian banks that were picked up of the men arrested in Miami, the international narcotics traffic, links to the Shaw, the Panamanian banks for Jonestown. It was Trujillo's time to go, and Jack Anderson runs with it with the suggestion that Fidel Castro was behind the killing of these 2 men, that he's the one to gain. He has more to lose by getting rid of 2 allies, 2 softies in Central and South America. If he had shot Pinochet, that would be something different, or the president of Uruguay or Paraguay, if he interfered with those elections. But he doesn't touch those people, and Jack Anderson is really come out with a bunch of articles that are just terrible. One of the subjects that interests me every week, and I haven't had time to update it lately, is the story of the missing millions. Where does the money go? Who's after it? Where does it fall? And there was an article this week on the Andrea Doria. That was the Italian ship that sunk. It was a luxury liner, and it sunk, and there's that fortune in cash and valuables. Now, the divers have an expertise. There are several safes in this ship that went down, and they have what you call a vacuum cleaner. And they went into the safe. The safe had money from the Bank of Rome, and the divers found the bank, and they had what you call a vacuum cleaner to go into the bank office. This is an underseas vacuum cleaner. They said, we have no idea if there's a fortune or not, but it will be the frosting on our cake. So there's an underseas vacuum cleaner to take out money from the Bank of Rome, and I wonder if it's linked to the Licio Jelly scandal and what happened when the vacuum cleaner opened the sunken Andrea Doria and took the files out. That really is a feat, you must admit. That it reminds me of other missing ships that were sunk, and there was money on them. There's the book In Pursuit of the Awa Maru that I've talked about before, and I want to do more later, a Bantam paperback, $5 billion or more that was sunk in a ship during the war, disguised as a Red Cross ship, knowing that it had billions of dollars of treasury. It was anywhere from $5 billion to 3.8 billion. This is billion or 14 million. There's a discrepancy on the value, but it was part of the Tsar's fortune also in another ship in 1905 that is being brought up. There was a ship called the Edinburgh that was purposely blown up outside of London. It was described in the London Times. 2/3 of the money of the recovery of this goes to Russia, gold and diamonds. This was sunk in 1942. The Lusitania is a story of a ship sunk on purpose as an excuse to get us into war, and I'm wondering how many people knew about this money. There's $50 million on the Edinburgh that was sunk in 1942, and as I say, 1/3 goes to Great Britain and 2/3 to Russia. There was another ship, the Empire Manor, described in the London Times, November the 9th, 1980. And this, they knew it was loaded with 1 ton of gold bullion and $50 million approximately. In 1973, they brought that up, and it was all delivered to the Bank of England. There's buried treasure inside Havana, not on a boat, uncalculated treasure that were put aside and buried somewhere for when Fidel Castro is overturned. And there is some more war loot in Manila, supposedly 2.9 million collection of gold that the Japanese left there. But the sinking of these ships purposely, the Lusitania and the Awa Maru, it makes you wonder now about the Andrea Doria. How many of these ships with these tremendous fortunes are purposely sunk and brought up at a reasonable time, knowing that whatever is on there cannot be hurt by the salt water, and whoever gets it holds the spoils with this tremendous wealth at the inflated prices. There was an article this last week on the economy of the United States in comparison to other countries that I thought was interesting and gives us something to ponder about as we put more money into weapons, into landing forces and types of airplanes and tanks. The United States is sinking deeper into its economic problems. This article said the United States falls to the 8th spot in terms of being the wealthiest nation. It no longer is up high per capita income. It's down to 8. The interesting thing, Kuwait, not Saudi Arabia, was the first country listed at the top of general prosperity, and that is all oil money. Switzerland was the second country. They have no wars, only banks. Maybe we should go into banking instead of making the weapons. Sweden, always put down for their socialist medicine, there's free education, free housing, largest per capita income, no big amount of money in armies. Sweden was third. Denmark, a socialist country, no large armies or funding for weapons, was fourth. 2 of our allies that we had to fight during the war, West Germany, and then Netherlands, that was taken over by Adolf Hitler, and then run by Prince Bernhard and Shell Oil. The West Germany and Netherlands are up there pretty high, and there was Belgium and Norway. The question is, in France, Are these socialist countries doing so badly? Are Sweden and Denmark and France becoming a very wealthy country and still voting to be socialist? The Germans had a poll last week, and I think 49% of them said they preferred to be captive rather than have a war against the Soviet Union, that they would prefer to be red than dead, even though America says better dead than red, and if you don't make weapons, we'll make neutron and get rid of you. The important thing is that with all of the weapons that we're building and the deaths that we're incurring, we're not so well off economically, and it seems to me that the economists could figure some of this out, the powers that be, but they don't want to. I'll do more in the weeks to come on the death of A.L. Feldman, the chairman of the airline, this Continental airline that was in controversy with the Texas International Airline. That has to do with suspected narcotics traffic and controversy of infight of these airplane companies. I have a friend in Houston, Texas, who has sent me almost every article in the Houston Post of the infighting between these two airline companies. So it was very interesting in lieu of the material she sent me and the drug problems that the airlines had, Texas International and so forth, that the president of this airline was dead, the Continental Airlines, just at the time. They said he was found dead because he was desperately fighting the takeover of Continental by Texas International, but he could have been killed so the takeover would be easier, and the takeover might not take place if he were alive. I don't know that he commits suicide because he was losing, or if he was murdered so that they would, one company would take over. There has been a lot of mean fighting between the two companies, and I have many articles on it. As I say, I'll go into them soon. Jack Anderson had another article, No Place to Hide, that 80 million to 150 million Americans would be killed in a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. And he goes on about the statistics of scare, but he protects the Murder Incorporated that Lyndon Johnson talked about. And the Murder Incorporated are the people that run this country, and yet he still protects them. He complains about the statistics, but he protects the murderers. Another article out of the World Bank, the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. I mean, that wasn't written in the Middle Ages. That was written now, coming out of the World Bank. It's absolutely obscene. Another one, Reagan dumps his tentative Irish envoy, William McCann. He had to dump him because McCann's been tied to convicted embezzler. Louis Osterer and his foundation Life is under criminal investigation. Ronald Reagan has William French Smith. That was another article this week about the mouthing but not the substance of going after crime. He's going after crime, but 94% of all crime comes from narcotics traffic. And he has appointments. The Teamster president who's under indictment, he entertains in the White House. He has an envoy to Russia who's linked to organized crime and to crime problems. He has a CIA director who's linked to Robert Vesco and the largest syndicate mob in the World Organization of Mobsters. And he has Frank Sinatra singing at his ball, inaugural ball, and he's supposed to go after crime without going after narcotics. That's a contradiction. Another article this week, plot to kill Fra Triano told. Fra Triano is a member of the organized crime group who brags about killing 20 people, and he wrote a book. He's been helping the law enforcement people in order to stay away from his convictions that he probably would get on any one of them. He's been working with the Justice Department. Now, Fra Triano is really mad at Frank Sinatra. He wanted a movie made out of his book, and he claims that Frank Sinatra stopped it. So he's writing a book, probably in hiding, about Frank Sinatra and organized crime. These are Fra Triano's allegations. And no wonder there's a plot to kill him, because he holds a lot of information. And I mention every week on this program that if Michael Sindona, who's in jail in New York, or Frank Churchill, or Michael Hand, and there's a whole list of 20 or 30 people, if they would come forward and begin to talk, and they are fighting each other, we'd get a few more solutions to some of the problems that are plaguing this country. I don't think the solutions are going to come from the left. I don't think they're going to come from the youth. I don't think they're going to come from the people that are, in quotes, concerned, because I get mail every week from 35 organizations that are, in quotes, concerned. the Rosenberg children, overturn the Alger-Hiss case, stop nuclear testing, stop the neutron bomb, stop Diablo Canyon, raise money to prosecute the Nazis in North Carolina. There are literally 35 causes a week, and no two of them can agree that what the important problem is. The problem comes from a lot of the shenanigans that I'm talking here about, and it will only come from the inside, such as Watergate came when somebody like James McCord, who worked with the CIA 20 years, that when those people from the inside begin to talk, the system will come undone. There was a hearing on the Howard Hughes case in Houston this week, and an article in the Los Angeles Times, a new Howard Hughes will turns up. Well, this is a funny story. It's not funny, but it's about a woman, Martha Graves, who went to the box of a friend of hers who passed away, and when she went to his safe deposit box because he was dead, she accidentally found the will that belonged to her late boss, Los Angeles attorney Earl Hightower. She used to work for Hightower, and she claims that he knew Howard. And when Hightower died, she went into this strong box and found the will of Howard Hughes. But it's interesting. She's part of an organization, and she's president of, that would be the recipient of this money. So, of course, the will is under question. But she described her company and mysterious foreign backers that were behind the company she's working for now. The directors of the company, she said it's called Acme International Corporation, include herself and another former Hightower secretary, a woman or person that worked for Mr. Hightower who had the Hughes will, named Phyllis B. Little, and another man, Franklin F. Ellis of Minnieville, Oregon, who Miss Graves described as a Baptist minister who formerly served as an investment counselor to the Vatican in Rome. Now, Howard Hughes and the Irish Mafia, or the CIA gang that I have claimed to have been fighting the Italian Mafia for control of the world's narcotics trade, and this gets a little complicated, have broken the back of the Vatican, or tried to, by using Michael Sindona and the crime syndicate to siphon money off from the Vatican Church to weaken it. And I believe that there is a strong anti-Catholic movement in this country. It's headquartered in Dallas and the Fort Worth area and in Chicago, and spreads out with these various TV ministers. There's a book out now about these TV ministers, these multi-millionaire ministers, and they are Baptists, and there are very many people with strong anti-Catholic feeling that were behind the killing of John Kennedy assassination. There was a large group, H.L. Hunt, and that entourage in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it's just interesting that she links the Howard Hughes organization and Howard Hughes with a Baptist minister who served as an investment counselor to the Vatican in Rome. So if the will story is wrong, if the names, it'd be interesting to check this out and see. I've never seen an article quite like this where the Baptist minister was the investment counselor to the Vatican in Rome, and then the Rome investments began to come unglued, which they are doing because of a large part of the Baptist ministers who are, in fact, in cahoots together. It was an interesting article that came out just on apropos of finding a will in this deceased man's box, but bringing in the Baptists who served as a counselor in Vatican in Rome. There's another article this week in Atlantic City. The states are urging a united policy for nuclear waste disposal. Now, isn't that funny? In 1981, July 81, that there's appeal to Congress for a high-level meeting to decide what to do with radioactive waste. Can you believe that? They've been making radioactive waste before the war was over, World War II was over, and using all kinds of weapons and stockpiling weapons, and want nuclear energy and nuclear plants, and we know they had nowhere to dispose of it. The condition before they started making the stuff should have been to find out what they were going to do with the waste before they started, but now they've had a meeting and decided they ought to know what to do with the waste. The most obscene photograph I ever had of Ronald Reagan, is Wednesday, August the 5th, 1981, in the Washington Post, page A2. AID gives back $28 million in funds, and it shows Ronald Reagan holding a check for $28 million that the Agency for International Development gave back to Ronald Reagan. Now, they legally were allowed to use this for poor countries. Part of this went to impoverished people. It went for legal assistance to the poor. It went for people such in Haiti. This article says Haiti will lose a project designed to help introduce improved technology, a project to increase production of a better grade of coffee, assistance to the Haitian Bar Association to help provide legal assistance to indigents, those poor refugees that will be sent back there from Puerto Rico to Haiti to be killed or tortured. And Ronald Reagan is laughing because instead of giving this money to the poor that need it, and it was allocated for them for people in Bangladesh or Upper Volta or Guyana or Costa Rica or El Salvador, AID money that would help the people with legal aid and so forth. He has a check which he's holding up a poster which is about 4 feet long that the American people just made $28 million in funds. There's another article, huge Bechtel Mining project. Those of you that don't get the San Francisco Chronicle, look that up. It's a very important article. This is July the 12th, 1981. And this is this is August the 12th, 1981, gold and copper. Now, Bechtel Corporation is an organization in San Francisco which is as large probably as the CIA that builds overseas in Saudi Arabia and other countries. It's a multinational building operation. It does everything from the BART trains in San Francisco to Saudi Arabian factories and so forth. Bechtel is an international organization equivalent to the CIA, and Caspar Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense, came out of that huge Bechtel project. Their headquarters are in San Francisco. But this article is from the Chronicle, August the 12th, tells about an investment they're going to make in New Guinea of gold and copper and mining and metals division. And it's very important because the satellites can look down and tell where the gold and mineral and silver is located in the world and around the world. And the huge corporations are able to borrow billions of dollars. There was another article, 1 billion line of credit, a mark of corporate clout. And huge corporations such as Texaco and DuPont and City Services and Seagram and Conoco and Allied corporations, they can borrow $1 billion and they've borrowed up to $46 billion. No private investors can ever stake out. So Bechtel has taken an area where they'll get gold and copper and so forth, and there's a picture in the Chronicle of the map. Now, they've divided this corporation among 4 people. Amoco, AMOCO Minerals, which is Standard Oil of Indiana, Broken Hill Proprietary, an Australian firm. Part 1/3 goes to New Guinea, and the other part is a German consortium led by a particular company in Germany where they discovered gold down near Australia in New Guinea in mid-1960s, and a global consortium can just come in and take the gold and the copper. Just as I said in the lines of Padachevsky and Network last week, there are no nations, there's just corporations. Now, one of the people involved in this 1/4 of the operation is Standard Oil of Indiana. And April the 1st, 1981, there was a United Press story that Neil Bush, the son of the Vice President of the United States, is the attorney for Standard Oil of Indiana. And I mentioned the relationship of Scott Hinckley, Vice President's. Scott Hinckley is the brother of the man who shot in Washington at the President of the United States, and 3 other people. Scott Hinckley was with Neil Bush of Standard Oil, and the Vanderbilt Energy have, according to the Wall Street Journal, April the 4th, have European investors, and also another article in the Salt Lake paper on Standard Oil of Indiana and Dorothy Hunt's plane crash at the time of Watergate. Now, it'd be very interesting to know, in lieu of the Bechtel Mining project and the control and the influence of the Bechtel investments, if any overseas money that is described as European investors comes from those German consortiums, if the Hinckley family is involved in any way with Bechtel in this new venture. See, there's a tangled web of overseas investments, and we don't know where the money is going into Vanderbilt Energy, which is the John Hinckley Sr. Outfit in Denver, Colorado, with their home base. The money is coming in for overseas. The overseas money is going to Bechtel. They can take a whole area like New Guinea and pull out all the copper and all the gold and have German, American, and unnamed investors making huge profits. And besides Caspar Weinberger, many executives and officials in the Reagan cabinet and decision makers come from the Bechtel organization. So they cover these resources. They get unlimited loans to look further into the wealth of the world and grab up the copper and magnesium or whatever you need and put it in the hands of a very few corporations, so that 2% of the interlocking corporations control almost all the minerals of the world. Maybe it's a little more than 2%, but the way they're merging and coming together, it's very important to look into exactly what the relationship is, particularly to some family like the Hinckley family, to Vice President Bush's family and Vanderbilt Energy, and the attempt to shoot Ronald Reagan and put George Bush in as president. Are there any interlocking financial interests? Because the Bechtel are working with Standard Oil of Indiana, which is Bush's son, is an executive for that corporation. I'm trying to point out that these, the vice president's family works for corporations that work with Bechtel, and that behind they grab for the world's resources and the world's narcotics. There's a combine that kill presidents in airplanes or shoot them in front of the Hilton Hotel or wherever they want, and hold the monopoly in the hands of a few people. No matter how many bullets have to fly, they hold the monopoly in the hands of these few people. The article last week, August the 10th, was the crowded morgue forced to rent a truck in Miami, overloaded with bodies, rising crime, surge in the refugee population. There are too many corpses. They store them in rented refrigerated trucks, and they have them, 35 corpses will cost $800 a month to hold in there till they know what to do with them. Pretty disgusting, and I have about 40 more stories I brought in, but there's no time to do them. They're called the Sickies of the Week. I think I gave you enough, and enough to think about for that listener in Santa Cruz who is fearful that there can't be this many interlocking conspiracies. Whatever names I threw out this evening all have a linear connection to each other. The same banking firms, the same relationships, the same clubs, the same business deals. And there is indeed, in fact, a group of people who have conspired, I believe, conspired against us, the people of the United States, in a way that never was intended, that will bring us back to a few feudal families who control the means for these portable jails, the portable morgues, the ice trucks, and so forth. And if you think you can stand up to them when they get really mean, it's hard. Now, they've asked to write letters to Governor Brown about Sirhan. Do me a favor, write a letter. If you're afraid to sign your name, just write your letter, put it in a mailbox anonymously, and say we're not in favor of Sirhan being in there the rest of his life until we know that this case has been opened again with the physical evidence of the bullets, and until we are convinced that Sirhan shot Robert Kennedy. And as I said before, if you don't want to solve that one, then you've got more to go, because Ronald Reagan and the whole California empire was behind that one. John Kennedy was murdered in Dallas and Martin Luther King in Memphis, but the California problem is the national problem, and that's where to look for the most trouble. In the meantime, save your grisly stories and consume them during the summer, and we'll keep going with the worst of the week. And I'll be back with you next week. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussell. This program originates from Carmel, California.